This is a screening of the 8mm movie taken by Steve Gould on the crossing of the Atlantic by Arvincourt 2. Captain John Knight, Barbara was on board, his wife. Let's see, we had Doug Cleland, myself, Eric Forsyth, my wife Edith Forsyth, Steve, and a young lady who was a friend of Doug's called Barbara, whose last name I forget. If we can keep this whole ball of wax going, we'll try and get the video, because I had to dig up an antique 8mm projector to do this. Looks like we filled the screen. So we'll roll the film and see what happens. Here we go. That's Port Jefferson, North Shore of Long Island. We had a big party before we left. There's Steve coming on board. You can see the little dog, it's a skipper key. I've forgotten his name now. There's John Knight with the beard. This is presumably a few days after we left. We had 3 gales on the transit, and 2 periods of very calm weather, which you'll see later. Let's see how this looks on the video. Well, I don't know how this is going to come out. Those seas look moderately rough. I'd say it's blowing 25, and we took those. Took me all of last night to get this 8mm projector to work again. The film broke, of course. I didn't have any splices for 8mm, so I had to use Scotch tape. So we'll see if it holds together. Steve at the tiller. You can see the old RAF compass in a box there. There I am taking a sight. I actually learned how to do celestial navigation on this trip, basically. And I think John learnt on the leg before, coming up from South Africa. There's Doug Cleland stitching the mainsail. The framing keeps wandering out of adjustment slightly. There's my wife Edith, and I think that's Barbara Knight behind her. Yeah, it is. The trouble is, if I touch the framing control, the whole damn projector tends to stop. It's very sticky. I don't know if this was overexposed originally or whether it's just deterioration in the last nearly 40 years. It was 1964 when we crossed over, so it's 37 years. The framing's come back by itself. That's totally overexposed. I don't know if anything's getting through on the video. It's just a shot up the mast anyway. Here we are, myself at the tiller, John sitting there, Barbara Knight. Steve Barber, the young Barbara, that may be her there on the lower left. She tended to stay in the cabin a lot. Yeah, that's her. I think her name was something like Barbara Catella. There's Barbara Knight coming on deck. This is Steve. I think Steve and Doug, I think, were cleaning the stove this day. It was one of those few sunny days we got after some heavy weather off Nantucket, and yeah, they're cleaning the stove. Still seems to be in the frame. Yeah, this is one of the calm spells. I think we had 2 of these, lasted a couple of days. Probably the Azores Bermuda High stretching north, although in those days I knew nothing about it. The route that John selected was to more or less sail due east to reach something I believe that was called Point C or something. It was marked on old pilot charts. And then we followed a great circle to the English Channel. So probably by doing that we did indeed intersect the Azores Bermuda High. I was not too fond of that dog. You can see I gave it a splash here. And it didn't like me much. At least we got clean this way. Yeah, this is... I think we caught something like 3 fish on this trip. Quite good, actually. They were a tuna type fish, skipjack or something. I think John said they were albacore. Perhaps he knows more about fish than I do. Anyway, it certainly produced a couple of meals. That's Doug holding the fish. That's the Barbara. Oh, now this is graduation day. Steve was graduating from high school on this day. Of course, he had to miss it. So he was leaving Bellport High. So we decided to give him his own little graduation ceremony, of which the certificate consisted of the centerfold from the Playboy magazine that we had. And I think John wrote a somewhat scurrilous message on it, something like, as a graduation exercise, he was entitled to deflower Miss June, whoever she was. And then this is me. What I'm doing here, John has lived in South Africa for something like 7 years, so I'm giving him a fur-lined jockstrap that we happen to have at the house. We brought with us. So that when he gets to England, he'll be warm in appropriate places. Doug Cleland and the dog. Becalmed. We actually put the dinghy in the water and took this picture. There we are. I think Steve was rowing. Somewhat overexposed too, but still you can just about see that it's a shot over the bow. Staysail and jib set. Overexposed again. I think Steve's camera was a very ancient one with no automatic controls. In fact, very shortly after this trip, Super 8 went completely out and it became, regular 8 went out, it all became Super 8. So That's why most of my films taken in the early days were Super 8. That's why I've got no gear. But fortunately, I had this old projector. I was able to get going. That's totally overexposed. Goodness knows what it is. It's even hard to tell. This is a better exposure, more contrast. Excuse me. This is the problem with that damn dog, of course. It left its little droppings all over the place, and in the middle of the night you often tended to pick up a coil of rope and find it had soft soap inside. John had an old machete used for flipping that over the side. It's a nice shot. You can see the walker log. John taking a sight. Oops, looks like the film is, oops, on the margin of crapping out. Anyway, it's come back to life. These big seas, I think, were, as we came up onto the western approaches, we had some heavy weather. Of course, there's no self-steerer. Every hour for the whole trip was somebody at the tiller. Yeah, I think this was the western approaches. Yeah, there's England now, presumably. Cornwall. Our destination was Falmouth. Took us, I believe it took 33 days, this crossing, relatively slow. They've got the ensign up. The question was what to do with the dog. John was going to kind of smuggle it in, so in fact my wife Edith gave it a shot of morphine. And almost before it had any time to have any effect, the customs were alongside. Before we even got the anchor down, you can see the quarantine flag going up, the Q flag. And they came alongside in a boat called the Mongoose, which you'll see in a minute. There it is. They were really on top of us. As I say, we weren't actually anchored. And the dog was sort of whining away in the aft cabin, but I think they were gentlemanly enough to ignore it. They probably smelt pretty bad too. They're leaving. John gave them a good slug of whiskey. That made them feel better, I think. Most of us left the boat the next day. I think Doug Cleland stayed on board. John and Barbara went off to Sunderland, and Barbara Cattell, whatever her name was, she flew home because she was already way past her leave that she'd taken. Steve went to London, and Edith and I went to London and stayed a few days. Then we went over to the continent. That's Falmouth, panning around. Well, amazingly enough, it ran through the projector without serious problems. That is fairly amazing. considering the age of all the equipment I'm running here. Yeah, this is Steve's shot of presumably one of the royal palaces or something with the guards. And that's the end.